Chapter 2, Life at Sea, bracket, 4 years later, end bracket. In the latter part of October 1863, I hired to a German ship by the name of Johannes Schwiffel. It was commanded by Captain Smith. The ship was from Kiel, and Captain Smith was from East Friedland, Germany. We sailed from Copenhagen on November 3rd. Our destination was Hull, England. A high wind came up against us when we got out in the Skagerrak. We had to seek shelter in Skagen, where we anchored in 20 fathoms of water with 75 fathoms of heavy chains. While here, a fishing boat fully equipped came to us and proffered their assistance and offered to pilot us to Frederikshavn. Our captain ignored the proffered help, as he had already heard the news that the Danish king, Frederick VII, had died, and the two countries, Denmark and Germany, were about to be involved in a war. The fishermen informed us that all sailors who were eligible for marine service were held for that purpose, hence the caution of our captain. 10 days later, we arrived in Hull and learned that the war had already begun, as troops had been mustered and marched against the enemy. I was very glad that I was in another country and could escape from participating in the horrible practice of warfare, a thing that I am much opposed to. We stayed in the town of Hull until after Christmas. In the meantime, our captain bargained for a cargo of freight in Spain, the town Almeria, which was a small coastal town in the Mediterranean Sea, and we sailed from Hull on New Year's Day, 1864. It being winter, we encountered many a hard storm, and many of the sailors succumbed on account of the severity of the elements. Everything went somewhat well with us, nevertheless, and when we were about 20 miles from Gibraltar, the weather became a little calmer, though we had a heavy sea. We perceived at a distance one morning a sailboat with a signal that they were in need of fresh water. We signaled to them that we would share our scant supply. The strange ship with a French flag came up to us. They drank our water like they were starved lions as they grabbed the cup from each other. Captain Smith soon saw that something had to be done or the men would drink themselves to death. The captain said, "Let us bring forth the rum jug and give them a good drink of rum that will satisfy." This was done, and the men were saved. We gave them a barrel of water, for which they were very glad and thankful. They said that death would have been their prospective lot before the sun would set in the horizon of another day. It was quite warm. They had no water to drink for 3 days. In the storm, the high sea had taken all of their water supply and wrecked much of their ship. Before we reached our destination, we also suffered a scarcity of water, but we finally got into the Strait of Gibraltar, and Captain Smith noticed with his spyglass that in a little gulf inland, a little foaming brook ran out into the sea, and Captain Smith gave orders that a boat with 4 men and barrels be made ready to go to the sparkling brook. We all thought this would be an easy matter. We rowed with all our might and finally reached the stream. We were indeed much happier than if we had discovered a gold mine with an unlimited supply of that metal. But as soon as we set foot upon land, there were several natives or coast robbers who made it their business to pillage all unfortunate ones who from time to time are shipwrecked and stranded ashore. The natives came running towards us and saying something of which we could not understand, but by signs we could see that they wanted money for the water, of which we had none. So they drew knives from their scabbard, which were long and sharp, and came toward us. And we had to hurry and get in the boats and run away. Our captain had on the vessel a spyglass that he used to follow us to the shore, and he was anticipating having a good cold drink of mountain water, which would satisfy his present desire. "Ah," said he, and laid the glass down. "Ah, that I had never sent the crew to shore," and paced up and down the ship's deck before answering the quizzing seamen. "Robbers," he finally said, "robbers. I can see their long knives directed against our men. If they kill them, then it is certain that they have agreed to rob the ship when it becomes dark." Everything for a while was still as a graveyard. The ship was gliding rapidly towards the east, as the water always rushes in that direction. The captain took his spyglass and discovered that the boat had left the shore with the crew, but he knew it would be a hard job to overtake the ship, as the onflowing water was carrying her so rapidly. And to anchor was out of the question, as the bottom could not be reached at 200 fathoms. On the ship, everybody was very anxious to learn of our episode with the robbers, but had to wait fully 2 hours before we could overtake them. 4 pairs of strong arms soon got the rowboat going at foaming speed toward the ship. As we rowed, we conversed of the many disappointments that a sailor must go through in life, and some very bad utterances were also pronounced for the inhuman treatment we had received, because we wished to take of that water which runs so unused out into the sea, in which no man can rightfully claim, except the God who created it. We 4 men, nevertheless, got as much water as we could drink before we were so ruthlessly driven from shore, but we got none in our barrels for our thirsty comrades. As soon as we got close enough to the ship, we could hear the captain's powerful voice as he called to us, "Have you any water?" Of course, the answer was no. As soon as we got on board, I had to tell the way we were treated by the natives, stormed with knives, and forced to flee to our boat and hurry away from the shore with all speed. We were then compelled to get along as best we could with our scanty and corrupted supply of water we had, with a little rum in it. We then got a light breeze of west wind, so that the ship glided rapidly on its way toward Almeria, Spain. The next day we had some ill luck again, in the atmosphere became entirely calm, so that the ocean current carried the ship towards a sandbank just away from Malaga. We had to drop a small anchor so as not to go aground, and to our already sad predicament was still added another. Some fishermen had cast a very large seine just in front of our boat, and it had caught on the prow of our ship. The seine, S-E-I-N-E, likewise had drifted, and we had to hurry up and get the net in the clear under the boat. The seine was considerably damaged, and of course no catch was made. Some of the sailors used their knives so as to get the seine out of the way as soon as possible. Soon there was a boat loaded with 14 terrified Spanish fishermen come alongside of the ship and came on board and began to raise an awful fuss and demanded $20 of the captain for damages, which the captain very emphatically denied them. Finally, after several outbursts of Spanish profanity, they went grumbling from the ship and went ashore. Soon they came back, and with them some men that wore uniforms and weapons, and demanded instantly the payment of $20 from the captain, but he still refused. They raised their arms in anger and threatened him with their weapons. The scene caused me great merriment, and I laughed right out loud. Before I could get my face sobered again, a rifle was pointed at me by one of the fishermen. One of the men in uniform took the gun away from my would-be murderer, and no harm was done. Captain Smith at that went abaft of the ship to his cabin and soon showed himself again in the door with 2 revolvers and a repeating rifle, and laid them one by one in front of him, and then commanded the crew abaft. Our unfriendly guests exchanged some words with each other and left our ship, and then got on their own boat. They kept a close eye on the weapons the captain had laid before him. There was a fisherman, however, who threatened that when night came, they would come again and get revenge. We had nothing to be afraid of, as when evening came, there was always a wind from the island. Knowing this, we got everything in readiness to set sail as soon as the wind began to blow. As luck would have it, the wind came a little earlier than usual. Our anchor was soon weighed and sail set up, and we were soon far away from the coast, going at a rate of 4 or 5 knots per hour. We did not see any more of our pests. We were nevertheless well armed. Our armament consisted of a little cabin, a little cannon, 2 double-barreled hunting guns, besides those guns that the captain had brought forward. It would be no easy task to enter the ship if we opened fire with all those weapons. We glided peacefully over the calm sea, though we had a watchful eye in the direction of our Spanish fishermen, so as not to give them a chance to get on our ship again and probably do us harm. We held a sharp lookout all night. The next morning we arrived at a small coastal town. The captain made up his mind to anchor there and go ashore and provide the ship with water, which happened in the following manner. It was a beautiful and warm morning, the 5th day of February, 1864, that we went inland with 3 men and the captain to get some good water, but it was an awful task to get only 2 barrels of water transported from the watering place to the boat, a distance of about 400 yards in loose sand. One can imagine rolling a barrel full of water in loose sand for such a distance, and along with that, the sun was scorching hot. It was indeed a hard job. There were many big drops of sweat fell from the sailors' foreheads. And I will not deny that some very indecent words were unfolded against those Spaniards who refused us water a few days back when it was so easily accessible. We often said afterward that a sailor must drink his water by the sweat of his brow. Space will not permit to go further into detail of these days' happenings, but I will say that the water in the barrels was quite warm when we got it to the boat. We had rolled it in the sand for about 4 hours. The captain brought some nice fruits and a few bottles of Malaga wine with him. We thus got on board ship at even time in pretty good spirits. We had We set sail immediately as the evening wind had begun to blow. As soon as the ship was in her right course toward our destination, the captain set before us some of the lovely fruits and a large glass of wine for each man. We relished this with a pleasant conversation as the sailing continued smoothly through the water at a good gait along the fascinating and beautiful coast of Spain. We soon forgot the trouble encountered with the pirates. The next day, we reached Almeria, Spain, it being our destination. Almeria is a small coast town, very prettily laid out at the foot of a small mountain range. A very luxurious vegetation covers the countryside for miles around. Melons, bananas, grapevines, figs, oranges, and olives grow in abundance, as well as many other things that grow and thrive in a tropical North Country. Our cargo consisted of coal, which was consigned to a small sugar factory here. We began to unload at once. On February 10th, 1864, when we had about half the cargo unloaded, the captain notified us that he had to take a trip to Malaga, Spain, to get some clearance papers in regard to his ship, and expected to return the next day and celebrate, it being his birthday and mine too. But towards evening of the 10th, a high wind rose, and it was not long before we realized that it was what the Spanish call in their language a savanda, which means a storm that reaches the length and width of the whole Mediterranean Sea and will hold on for many days. A storm that is more dreaded by a seaman than any other thing he has to contend with. We were in great perplexity as just what to do or how to act. I have already stated our captain had gone ashore. I was therefore next in command, so the responsibility naturally fell to me. The velocity of the wind increased at the setting of the sun so much that we feared our anchor chain would give way and the ship would be driven ashore and become a wreckage. In order to save the ship and ourselves, we left a buoy at the anchor, cut loose, set sail, and went to sea. That maneuver was performed very practically. That is, every man at his post who did the right thing at the right time. This gave me a great deal of pride and more confidence in myself as a commander of a great sailing vessel. Though both man and ship were in great danger of going to the bottom of the sea for a watery grave. We thus went to sea with only our storm sails outstretched. We were not out of danger by any means. When an occasion like this precedes a Mediterranean storm, where there has been a calm of several days and no atmospheric movement, several hundred ships became stalled at the mouth of the Strait of Gibraltar on account of no wind. And when the storm breaks from the west, all those ships travel eastward with the storm. Thus was our predicament. However, we could not stop as the wind and the waves were rushing us forward in the melee. It was February 11th at 8 o'clock p.m. I took full command in the captain's place. According to the reading of our barometer, the storm was reckoned as a hurricane. Everything on board ship was in first-class order. Our ship lay very light upon the sea, for we had nearly half of our cargo unloaded. So the main danger we now feared was the many large ships, both steam and sail. They were liable to appear from a mountainous wave at any moment and cut us in two and send us to the bottom. Before it became dark, I saw to it that everything was in readiness for a hurried maneuver and reminded the men to be on the alert and not neglect their duty. The heavens were overcast with dark black clouds, and the night's darkness was dismal to the fullest extent. The tumultuous waves seemed to proclaim the blowing of the trumpet on the last day of judgment, and the elements were overloaded to their utmost and bent upon destroying everything in their path. Many ships passed us, paying strict observance to the rules of navigation. At about 11 o'clock p.m., a large tramp steamer came plowing through the waves, paying no attention to rules or regulations whatsoever. They were nearly on us before we saw them. I recognized that there must be a quick action on our part. What must be done had to be done in a hurry. They had no regard for our signals. They were not over 50 fathoms from us, and I saw by their signal lamps that their course was right down on us. I took command. Up with the helm and clear, and the next moment there came a very large wave from the steamer's bow. When she ducked down in the sea, this wave gave our ship such a powerful push that the fore end of our vessel swung around and saved us from being crushed by the big monster. We were indeed very uncomfortable for a few seconds when we saw that big black ship from her fore stern, high up over our little vessel. Had it not been for the high wave sent by Providence, we all would have been lying at the bottom of the sea at this time. But God rules upon the water as well as upon the land, for it was surely beyond man's power to save us. Steersman Krog came on deck as he was awakened by the noise that follows such a movement. We were out of danger and everything was running smoothly again. When we had time to get possession of our natural selves again and think how near we were to going down to a watery grave, we all rendered a prayer to our protector in heaven. This all happened just 23 years after my first voyage to this earth, and 32 years since Captain Smith was born. The storm held on and drove us 20 miles eastward in the Mediterranean Sea before a let-up was noticed. It took us 5 days and nights before we could get back to our starting place where we could finish unloading our cargo. Captain Smith was greatly worried and had suffered untold agony of mind because of his fear for our safety. He had been told by the natives of our lifting anchor and going to sea, and he well knew of the danger we were in out there, at the mercy of the angry sea. He also feared that we would be driven to the African coast and there become victims of sea robbers who lie in wait for helpless ships that are blown ashore and then robbed, plundered, and murdered their helpless victims. The captain had hired several boats and had gone out and searched for us. I shall never forget the occasion when we arrived at our anchoring place, how happy our captain was to see us and find that all was well and the ship intact. We got on board and brought with him a jug of the finest Malaga wine and said, "Men, you are in need of a much-needed rest. Come at my expense and partake of this fine wine and tell me of the harrowing happenings of the last few days." We related all that had transpired since he had left, and then asked him how he had gotten along. He had not been short of experiences himself. We sure got a good laugh when he told us about riding a donkey on his birthday that was so sharp that it nearly cut him in two. He said he was compelled to lay in bed for 2 days and then had to use 2 canes in order to walk. He had been waylaid by coast robbers who infest the small coast towns of Spain. They especially rob and plunder foreigners, as they always have money. The captain had to hide himself with an old lady who lived in a little dirty shanty for 2 days. There were no roads along the coast, and the only means of transportation was a donkey. It sure is a comical sight to see a sailor bumping along on the back of a donkey. That is nothing more than a bone pile, and its owner holding on to its tail with a sharp stick in his hand, forcing the animal ahead to its utmost strength. When we had rested and told of the nerve-wracking experience that we had gone through and had been strengthened by the good Malaga wine, we then began the tedious work of finding and recovering our anchor, which took us some 3 hours before we had it in on the boat again. We had 75 fathoms of heavy chain out, and the anchor had sunk so deep in the bottom of the sea that the ship sank nearly a foot in the water while we were winding it in before the anchor did come loose from the bottom. After that, everything went along smoothly, and we soon had the remainder of our cargo unloaded. We at once reloaded with sulfur to be freighted to London for the market there. A great deal of sulfur is produced in this part of Spain and is shipped to all parts of the world. This sulfur is very high quality. On March 3, we were fully loaded, raised anchor, set sail, and were on our journey toward London with a good wind. We passed through the Strait of Gibraltar on March 7, 1864. Nothing happened of any unusual consequences on our sail to London, where we arrived in shipshape and in good time. We arrived at England's metropolitan city the latter part of March, and there soon discharged our cargo. Here the captain contracted a cargo of coal for Danzig, Prussia, Germany. We got a tugboat to tow us to West Hartlepool, where our load was soon ready for us. Here we ran the ship under a coal spout. In less than 4 hours we had our full cargo, several hundred tons. All was soon in order, and we set sail again on our journey. About the middle of April, we sailed past the land of my birth, but made no stops, for the war between Germany and Denmark was still on, and the captain apprehended that the authorities may perchance take me, as I was still a subject to the Danish kingdom. I had not yet served my military obligations to my country. After we had discharged our cargo at Danzig, we took on a cargo of rye to be freighted to Grimsby, England, where we landed safely in the latter place. Here we took on a cargo of coal, consigned to Königsberg, Germany. It was now the middle of May, and the landscapes along the ocean fronts at this time of the year are very pretty. A rich growth of flowers and vegetables occupies the earth, and the beech trees with their crowns of green were indeed wonderful, especially to a seaman. We soon got our cargo out and reloaded with oats. We arrived safely at Newcastle, England, and there unloaded and took on a cargo of coal for Antwerp, Belgium. At this place we again loaded with old iron for Brake, Germany. On this trip some very laughable events transpired. We had hired a new man on board, a green seaman who was a Belgian and with no sea experience at all. He was a carpenter by trade. As soon as he went to sea, he became seasick. We thought in 3 or 4 days he would be all right again, but the 4th day showed no improvement. So the mate ordered him on deck. We finally got him up and laid him on deck. A high wind was blowing the waves over the ship when we decided to lay him leeward. There is always a lot of water on the back of a ship when the wind blows. He laid in the water and let us slush him from one side to the other, just like a chunk of wood. We all had a good laugh at this, so when he got soaked a good while, the steersman ordered him hung up to dry, but first gave him a good walk. The walk was very difficult, for he let us drag him all the way while he thundered out some awful oaths and some mean swear words, the like of which had never before been heard on the Johannes Schwiffel. The steersman gave orders that we should make a tackle ready and hoist him up in the rigging of the ship and tie him fast until he became good and dry. The rascal was soon put in the stall or cage we made for him, tied fast, and then into the air he went at a lively gait. We all singing a favorite sailor song, and thus was France, that being his name, up in the rigging and made fast, and there he hung for 2 hours. But to our dismay, this remedy did but little good for our Belgian carpenter. He did not get entirely over his seasickness until we came to Brake. Here he ate dinner, then got orders from the captain to stay on board ship while the rest of us went on shore. But toward evening, we came on board, and lo, our Belgian was gone, and he had broken into the captain's trunk and stole over 30 marks, about $7. Also watch, a few things from the sailors, and we saw him no more. While we were laying in at Brake, there was a sea battle on at Helgoland between the Danish, Austrian, and Prussian battleships. The Danes were victorious, with the enemy suffering a very decided defeat. We laid here for a short time, waiting for a chance to sneak out to sea. We had our ballast all in and slipped out during a dark night on our way to Nordsjø, Norway, about 15 miles north of Trondheim. We were here in early summer, so at Nordsjø, it was light all night long for about 10 weeks. We took on here a cargo of planks and boards, and from thence back to Brake. Well, at Nordsjø, I used to go hunting at night in the mountains for wild chickens. It sure was funny not to have any darkness. On this trip, I had to do service as first steersman, as our regular man had gone and taken his pretty maiden to wife and did not come back to the ship before we had unloaded our full cargo. This being my first trip as steersman in full charge of everything. The captain told me that I had handled the ship very satisfactorily. all the unloading of the cargo was in my full charge, and all my figures were so accurate that both the receiver of the cargo and Captain Smith called me a true measurer, which I considered a very high compliment, and received therefore steersman pay, which was 48 kroner, or $13 US money a month. We had now determined on a trip to Liverpool, but it was a very risky undertaking for us to run the Danish blockade. They, the Danes, had their warships on guard all the time at the harbor. We were, of course, a German ship. Along sometime in October, it being a dark night, a high wind came up from inland, so we slipped out through the blockade and was a long way to sea and out of danger when the Danish fleet went a long way to sea and out of danger on the Danish fleet when morning came. 8 days thereafter, we sailed through the Bristol Canal, and then after a few more days, we arrived at Liverpool. Here we took on a cargo of brown sugar consigned to Itzehoe, Germany. It took us some time before we had our load, and many a hard storm went over while we lay peacefully and safe in the harbor at Liverpool. It was nearly Christmas before we got out to sea to begin our journey to our destination. Everything was all set on December 10, 1864, but we had to stay in the harbor a few days longer on account of strong and contrary winds. A few days of good weather finally came, so we moved out very carefully toward our mark. Every sailor generally prepares himself to meet hard storms, great dangers, and hardships of all kinds at this time of year, especially in these waters. We eventually arrived in the English Channel. Here we encountered stormy and contrary winds and rain. Quite awful darkness covered the deep, long, and dreary night, where our lot had but little sleep or rest. We had to keep a special lookout in these waters at this time of the year for the many ships that were passing on both directions. Ferociousness of the storm increased as the night dragged on, and we were near exhausted of our strength. Our courageous captain, however, knew how to keep up the spirit and hope of every man on board by getting out and leading the way. He was a leader, not a driver. It was now Christmas Eve day, and we were near England, so that we could seek shelter off her coast. We did this, dropping our anchor near Plymouth, and here try to get a little rest on Christmas night, but nothing doing, as we shall see. First, we were served to a good beef steak for supper. We were looking forward with great expectation to get some much needed sleep and rest as we were talking these things over, and how Santa had such a nice gift in store for us, namely sleep. The captain came in person and talked to the crew and bade me to go to his cabin and see what the barometer promised. I was at once aware of what we could expect, and there was to be no sleep or rest that night. The barometer read almost earthquake. Captain said to me, "Hans, we cannot go to bunk tonight, for we must be prepared for the worst. If the wind turns toward the land, then the ship and all on board will undoubtedly perish." I said to the captain, "I am not tired in the least, and am ready to go all night and longer if necessary. The darkness was awful. The rain came down in torrents with no sign of a let-up and no bed during the long Christmas night. The gift we got from Santa was to listen to the eternal mournful song of the storm all night long. We did not feel inclined to sing Merry Christmas songs, but our talk was, I wonder if father, mother, brother, sister, or the girl who was engaged to the sailor thought, where is my boy tonight? Where is he that is my ideal? The one who I am waiting for to come home and bring good cheer to me. To those at home who are sitting around a warm fire, sheltered from the elements in their security, enjoying the festivities of the hour to their fullest satisfaction and pleasure, we wondered if they had one thought of what a Christmas Eve was to a sailor who is exposed to the hardships on the wind and sea and who rocked on the sea to a wet grave. Finally, the much-awaited daylight came, and I looked up towards the weather vane and discovered a white dove that sat on the knob. I reported to the captain, and he said it must be a little carrier pigeon. As it got lighter, we saw a three-mast ship that was during the night had stranded on the banks a mile from us. A short while after, we saw the life-saving boat go out to the ill-fated ship, but most of the crew had gone from the ship. Evidently, they had gone away in their small boat, and in all probability were an offering to the toll of the sea. Towards noon, the wind changed to the northwest, and we set sail. We steered our course through the Channel and over the North Sea with a good wind, and 3 days later we were at Helgoland, Germany. There we got a pilot from Cuxhaven and who piloted us into Gleickstadt. We could not by all means get into Itzehoe on account of the ice. Well, at Gleickstadt, we got a letter from home that informed me that my father was very sick and wished to see and talk to me before he died. Gladly, I would go home to see my sick father and my mother and all the members of the household. I especially wanted to tell my father that I'd kept my promise to him that I had made before I had gone to sea.